over 10 years, Democrats have tried everything to stop Donald Trump. Their latest attempt is to keep hammering away at the Epstein files and say that the truth will come out someday and bury Donald Trump. It must be there. So now a shibboleth or article of faith in the Democratic Party. But we actually already know the real truth about the Epstein files. 5 different Department of Justices looked at the Epstein files and didn't find anything to prosecute anyone on. The Bush administration, the Obama administration, Trump 1.0, Biden, and Trump 2.0. Think about that. In order to believe that Democrats are going to find something in the Epstein files, you have to think that the Biden DOJ missed it. It's this drumbeat that people have, that there are some nefarious people who have committed crimes and got away with it. But unfortunately, there may be some really awful people in the Epstein files. Clearly, Epstein did some reprehensible things, but there is not evidence of other people committing crimes. Last night, we asked Democratic Massachusetts Congressman Lori Trahan on what she and other Democrats, think should be prosecuted. I've got a lot of congresspeople who want to come on and say, you need to bring people to justice. Who do you think should be prosecuted, and what should they be charged with?
I think right now what these victims deserve, they've waited long enough. They know that there are people who've committed
That's not an answer to the question.
Around women being...
Here's the thing. In America, we don't just charge people with crimes because we want to. America is built on the idea of justice. There must be a crime, and then prosecutors figure out who committed it and charge them. With Epstein, people are convinced there are crimes far beyond Epstein and Maxwell. After last night's segment, a viewer, Diana Ameziquita, wrote, "You're a journalist. Act like one. Stop protecting abusers and rapers. It's a shame watching you." I am acting like a journalist, in fact. I am asking the questions of people who say that there have crimes have been committed, of who committed the crimes. It is the most basic question. With us now, Democratic Virginia Congressman Suhas Subramanyam, member of the House Oversight Committee. Good to see you, Congressman. You have an advantage here because I didn't go to law school. You did. But do you agree that for people to say that there have been crimes that have been committed, it is only responsible that they say who committed the crimes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think crimes have been committed. I think we just don't know the extent of it. We don't have all the evidence. That's the reality. At least I don't have all the evidence.
Well, Congress has all of the Epstein files, right?
Congress does not have all of the Epstein files. The administration has all of them, but they're withholding about 2.5 million of the files, much of which are files that I would really like to see and been looking for. The files that they did release, many of them I went into the DOJ to look at the under-redacted versions, and many of them were still redacted. And they say that they received them redacted, but that doesn't make any sense to me. They're court filings. So we still have a lot of evidence we need to find.
Okay. So help me understand here. You believe that there have been other crimes committed. Does that mean that you believe that there were 5 Department of Justices that somehow all agreed to cover up crimes by people against children?
I don't know what was going through their minds, but I do think there were other crimes committed. Absolutely. I think not just
you think though, but the law is based on evidence. What evidence is there that other people committed crimes?
I don't have all the evidence because I haven't seen all the files.
You don't have any evidence, though.
I can tell you. What's that?
You don't have any evidence that other people committed crimes.
Well, we have a lot of transfers. We're looking into financial documents, for instance, and we're going to get more from the banks. But, you know, the documents that we do have seems like there was a lot going on with Les Wexner, for instance, and Jeffrey Epstein. And so we're going to be talking to Les Wexner next week. It looks like the state also had a lot going on. We're going to be talking to the executors of the estate. And then, of course, we have the victims and their statements, too, which have been withheld from us. And so the victims told us a lot about in those statements that we just can't see. And so, again, the prosecutors, the DOJ, the FBI, the victims named names, they went to them, and they simply ignored them or turned ahead the other way. And they didn't prosecute Jeffrey Epstein to the fullest extent.
Well, you're talking about Jeffrey Epstein, who's now dead. We still have not, and I still am perplexed because nobody can give me a single name of another person they think should be charged with a crime. I think because at least smart people, like attorneys like yourself, realize what that would open themselves up to in terms of liability if they did. Interestingly enough, the Democrats and Republicans, sort of on both sides, or I would say the horseshoe of effect, are in agreement on this. For example, here is Carl Higbie on Newsmax.
Bill Barr, who, by the way, his name does appear in some of these files, Merrick Garland, Bush, Obama, all of them, they all failed. They all failed, which is why we reelected Donald Trump in part, to fix this problem. And now it's on your plate, Pam Bondi. You took that in by taking this job. This is either a cover-up or it's incompetence. And I want somebody to go to jail for it. At a minimum, anybody involved with screwing this up should no longer work at the DOJ or have a law license or anything.
Is it not possible, Congressman, that there is no screw-up, there is no conspiracy? It's pretty simple that Jeffrey Epstein was a barbaric and horrific individual. He had Ghislaine Maxwell as an accomplice, both of whom were charged. One's in jail, one's dead. And there was a lot of other rich people who were happy to be around Jeffrey Epstein but did not commit other crimes.
It's difficult for me to accept that because the victims say otherwise, and the victims have tried to tell their story multiple times to the government, and the government simply has failed them over and over again. In many cases, collaborating with some of the people.
Congressman, I'll give you this. I always hate it when people tell me, like, there's this thing that we know that we can't tell you, that everybody else would believe us, and the world would change if we knew it, especially when there's 435 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate, all of whom, and I say this respectfully, love nothing more than being on television. And you've got a bunch of cable news channels, myself included, that would be more than happy to welcome any Epstein victim on to tell their story and implicate other people and provide either evidence or proof or even accusations that other men did bad things. But not one of those people will come forward and do it. And yet you're telling me that you think there's evidence of other crimes.
I mean, Virginia Roberts Giuffre wrote an entire book and spoke out and named names. She named Prince Andrew, who has since lost his title.
And Prince Andrew has been totally disgraced, and we've known that. And she actually is the one who exonerated Donald Trump, and nobody in the Democratic Party seems to care about that.
But one of the problems with trying to charge someone with a crime is that the statute of limitations tolls on a lot of these sex crimes, and so unfortunately, we're trying to change those laws. Myself and Teresa Ledger Fernandez have introduced bills to try to change that, but we can't charge them with a crime in some cases. So we'd like to, but in any case,
yeah, it seems like there's a whole lot of smoke here. I've yet to see any fire, but we'll keep digging. You're welcome to come back anytime. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.